So John Green's going to lay out like how the election of 1860 worked and how it played out for Abraham Lincoln.
In 1860, the Republican Party chose as its candidate Abraham Lincoln, whose hair and upper forehead you can see here. He'd proved his eloquence, if not his electability, in a series of debates with Stephen Douglas when the two were running for the Senate in 1858. Lincoln lost that election, but the debates made him famous.
Okay, so separate election. This was 2 years before. Douglas and Lincoln, they were both running to be U.S. senators, and they went around the state of Illinois debating each other. Even though Lincoln lost, though, it helped a lot of people to see that he was a good debater, that he was quick on his feet, that he was smart. This later helped him to become the Republican nominee in the race for the presidency.
And he could appeal to immigrant voters because he wasn't associated with the know-nothings. The Democrats, on the other hand, were, to use a
The know-nothings, by the way, that was like an anti-immigrant party.
Term, a hot mess. The northern wing of the party favored Stephen Douglas, but he was unacceptable to voters in the Deep South, so Southern Democrats nominated John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky, making the Democrats the last remaining truly national party, no longer truly a national party. A third party, the Constitutional Union Party, dedicated to preserving the...
Okay, so wanted to note that with the Democrats, they were divided. When you have a party that's divided, oftentimes it splits the vote. And so we'll see that this is basically what happens to the Democrats in this situation. Okay, so when you look at this election, a lot of southern states, like we're going to see here, they don't even put Lincoln on the ballot. They basically didn't even want people to have the chance to vote for him.
Completely. Many Southerners weren't convinced and swore if Lincoln won, then they were gone. As in secession. As in, there are two countries now, fool. In 10 southern states, Lincoln wasn't even on the ballot, while the Northern Democrats...
Okay, so understand what he's pointing out. There were some Southerners saying, even before the Civil War started, they said, if Lincoln's elected, we are out of here. We are not going to stay part of the country. And that's what they attempted.
And the Constitutional Union Party campaigned that they were the ones who could keep the country united. They ironically further caused the country to divide, as we will soon find out. Stephen Douglas made numerous personal appearances and gave speeches to campaign, which back then was rare. In fact, Douglas changed...
Okay, so Douglas sets a precedent then for other politicians to later go forward and give campaign speeches. So it wasn't really as big of a thing before Douglas.
The game by doing this, and many more later would follow in his path. This election also had campaign flyers with photographs of the candidates for the first time. Imagine that, seeing what the person you voted for actually looks like. And vote they did. Voters came out to the polls in higher numbers, more so than at any point prior.
Okay, look at this drawing, and you can just see, again, the tension that's going on with this campaign. Okay, so we were just looking at some of the facts of the facts of the election, and so now we're going to look at the outcomes after people vote.
As it is, i.e. including slavery, nominated John Bell of Tennessee. Abraham Lincoln received 0 votes in 9 American states, but he won 40% of the overall popular vote, including majorities in many of the most populous states, thereby winning the Electoral College. So anytime a guy becomes...
Okay, so Lincoln wins, doesn't get votes in the South, but he gets votes in other parts of the country. So he gets a lot of votes in the North, and that's what helps him to have a majority to win the election.
President who literally did not appear on your ballot, there is likely to be a problem. And indeed, Lincoln's election led to a number of southern states seceding from the Union. Lincoln himself hated slavery, but he repeatedly said that he would leave it alone in the states where it existed. But the demographics of Lincoln's election showed Southerners and Northerners alike that slave power, to whatever extent it had existed, was over. By the time he took office on March 1st, 1861, 7 states had seceded and formed the Confederate States of America, and the stage was set for the fighting to begin, which it did when Southern troops fired upon the Union garrison at Fort Sumter in...
Okay, so South Carolina, they're the first state to break away. If you look at their Declaration of Secession, because some people try to say later, no, it was about states' rights. South Carolina lays out in their Declaration of Secession that it was completely about slavery. It's obvious when you look at the reasons that they gave at the time that it was about slavery, and them trying to later say, it was just about following the Constitution. That's myth of lost cause, Daughters of the Confederacy kind of stuff. Okay, so when you start at the top, so this is South Carolina Declaration of Secession, 1860. Okay, right at the beginning, saying an increasing hostility on the part of non-slaveholding states to the institution of slavery. So they're basically saying like Northerners don't like slavery. Okay. Talks about specific states, Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York, and names out some northern states that have enacted laws to try to basically like render useless the Fugitive Slave Act. Okay, so right at the beginning, they are saying like it's basically about slavery. People don't like slavery. They're not following the Fugitive Slave Act, and so that's why we're breaking off to start our own country. So they just lay it out right there. But yeah, basically right as Lincoln is elected, states start breaking away, starting with South Carolina. And by the time he gives his inaugural address, you've already had multiple states. Okay, so this is Lincoln's first inaugural speech. So right when he gets put in, so March 4th, 1861. So he's a new president, and he's saying right at the beginning, apprehension seems to exist among the people of southern states that their property, their peace, their personal security would be endangered. There's never been reasonable cause for such apprehension. So he's basically saying, like right at the beginning, right here, I have no purpose to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. So he just didn't want it to spread, but he wasn't trying to end it immediately. But the southern states started to break off. Now later, once they're in the war, Lincoln does push to end slavery completely. But he says initially that's not his goal. So again, that's the election of 1860 with Abraham Lincoln. Really, it's like what causes a lot of the states to start breaking off in the South, and the Civil War starts.